Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker and today's video is a continuation of my NBA season preview series for the 2019-20 NBA season, the very last one, and this one is for the Philadelphia 76ers. The 76ers finished with a 51-31 record last year and were extremely close to making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, losing to the eventual NBA champion Toronto Raptors on a last-second shot in Game 7 in the second round of the playoffs. But the team was not content with just running it back with the exact same group, and they have done a lot of really interesting things in the offseason to set up their team to be really different than a lot of other teams across the NBA, setting themselves up as one of the most interesting teams in the entire league, which is why I saved them for last in the season preview series. But before we get to this upcoming season, let's talk about that offseason that was so interesting. And the first edition is of course going to be Al Horford, who was one of the most surprising free agency moves of the entire offseason, simply because people didn't expect him to leave Boston. And I talked about that in the Celtics season preview. He ended up coming over to Philadelphia, and his fit with this team is gonna be really interesting because it kind of serves two purposes for the 76ers. Obviously, he can play with Joel Embiid. Both of them can space the floor. Horford slightly better than Embiid, in my opinion, but they can definitely coexist even in an NBA in which everybody is going smaller. Horford has the foot speed and the defensive ability to play at the 4 spot, so that's good that he's that good of a starter for them, but also this allows the 76ers to rest Joel Embiid more during the season than maybe they could in the past and not rely on him so much during the season so that he can be fresher and healthier in the playoffs. So this is a good addition in terms of this upcoming season for the Sixers. I'm not so sure about the 4-year, over $109 million contract in the long term, but for this upcoming season, it actually makes a lot of sense. Moving on now to another big addition, and this one is Josh Richardson, who the team traded for from Miami in exchange for Jimmy Butler. And I talked about this in the Miami Heat season preview. In this upcoming season, Jimmy Butler is going to be a better player than Josh Richardson. But beyond that, Josh Richardson could be a better player than Jimmy Butler this time next year as we go into that NBA season. So this is an interesting addition from a team that seemed to be going really all in for the last year and a half on contending for a championship, making a move that actually puts them behind that a little bit more with Josh Richardson. However, I do think his fit is actually a little bit better on this team than Jimmy Butler's would have been, and even though the talent might be a little bit lower. Should be a good defender, should be a good shooter, should be an occasional playmaker and scorer as well, but someone that should be more willing to kind of fit into this group and allow the other stars on this roster to do what they do best and have him just kind of fill in the spaces where they need to be filled, rather than someone like Jimmy Butler that's going to need to be the alpha dog. So again, really good move. I like this move by the Sixers to trade Jimmy Butler in exchange for Josh Richardson, especially considering that if they were going to lose Jimmy Butler this offseason, it was going to be for nothing. So at least they got value back. Nice move here. And then we go from two of the bigger moves of the offseason for the Philadelphia 76ers to two really quiet ones. It's Trey, Burke, and Raul Neto. They brought in both of these guys to provide them some backcourt depth. Burke had a pretty good statistical season last year. Neto kind of was the third point guard on that Utah Jazz team. So both of them should provide depth, but I'm not expecting a ton out of either of them. And now we get to the subtractions category. First, obviously, is going to be Jimmy Butler, player that they traded away in exchange for Josh Richardson to the Miami Heat. Kind of an up and down tenure for him in Philadelphia. Really, his whole season last year was just a complete roller coaster from all the stuff in Minnesota and then coming to Philadelphia, some apparent issues that he had there. Ended up moving on out of Miami, where he hopefully will be staying for the next couple of seasons and not causing too many issues. They will miss his defensive presence, his scoring, especially late in games. That's going to be an issue potentially for this team this upcoming season. Joel Embiid is an outstanding player, but in terms of getting a big guy a shot later in games, it can definitely be much more difficult. And so that closer role is still vacant for this team, and that is probably the biggest part of Jimmy Butler's game that they're going to miss. Next up now is JJ Redick, and he ended up moving on to the New Orleans Pelicans. They're going to miss his shooting, his spacing ability, certainly an occasional playmaking as well that he really improved on, certainly once he got to Philadelphia. The leadership that he provided as well. You pretty much know what the team is missing out on when JJ Redick leaves town. And then last up, two less significant losses for this team. The first is Wilson Chandler, who provided a good amount of size at the 3 and 4 spots for this team, could shoot it a little bit as well. They're going to miss that from him, but it's not a huge deal that he ended up moving on to Brooklyn. And then the last player is Boban, who did end up signing with the Mavericks. They'll miss his front court depth, although they do still have options there, but they certainly will miss smaller aspects of the games of both Chandler and Boban. Moving on now, let's take a look at the depth chart. For starters, I have Simmons, Richardson, Harris, Horford, and Embiid. That's the starting unit that most people are putting together for this team as a gigantic starting group. Then off the bench, I have Burke, Neto, Smith, Ennis, Scott, and O'Quinn. So first things first, it's pretty obvious about the starting group. Not only is it gigantic, but there's also a lot of different ways in which you could go from the starters to then whatever second unit groups you want to bring in. Like Richardson can play the 2 or the 3, could maybe even moonlight a little bit at the 1 as a playmaker if you wanted to. Harris could play the 3 or the 4. Horford could play the 4 or the 5, and Embiid's pretty much set at the 5. Simmons can play pretty much wherever you want him to. But the big issue for me in this starting group is definitely going to be the floor spacing. Richardson is a good, not great 3-point shooter. Harris is a good, not great 3-point shooter, as are Horford and Embiid. And then we already know about Ben Simmons. Despite the fact that he made a preseason 3, I don't think he's going to be shooting 35% from 3 or anything this upcoming season. So that's a big concern. Obviously, they're hoping that their size, their defensive ability, and their ability to crash the glass and get offensive rebounds is going to counteract their limited spacing, at least in the starting unit. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're one of the lowest 3-point shooting percentage teams in the entire NBA this season, which it's kind of refreshing that they're kind of looking to do something different than what most of the teams around the league are doing, but still could be a concern from an on-court perspective. In terms of the bench, not a lot of great contributors here, which is, it's good that their starting lineup is so good because the bench is not great. I mean, Trey, Burke, Zaire Smith, James Ennis, like maybe you could talk Mike Scott, like maybe you could talk me into a few of those guys being good contributors this season, but they're really going to be relying a lot on their starters, which is fine in the postseason, but to get through a bit of a longer regular season could be an issue for this team. Moving on now, let's talk about some players to watch. And for me, there's really only one guy, and it is Zaire Smith, who had a really strange first season, missed a lot of time, don't really know what happened there medically, but this season could actually be a really important and impactful player for this team. An outstanding athlete, someone that can defend extremely well. If he can shoot well from 3, he's going to get a lot of run for this team off the bench. They're going to need the depth that he is going to provide. Again, when you look at the other players that they have coming off the bench in their depth chart, it's not great, does not instill a lot of confidence in you at all, but Smith is the highest upside player on that bench, and if he can step up and be a really good 6th man, that changes a lot of things about this 76ers team for this upcoming season, so definitely keep an eye on him. And then last up, let's go ahead and talk about expectations and predictions. For me, expectations-wise, the 76ers are a championship level team. I think they're a legitimate championship contender. In terms of predictions, I have them at 53 to 58 wins and one of the 5 best teams in the league. Maybe not so from a like win-loss standpoint, but in terms of sheer talent, I think this is a top 5 team in the league and a true championship contender. I have already talked about a couple of the concerns that I do have for this team, and the spacing thing, especially in the postseason, could be a big issue. But if you want to go on the other side of that argument, you could also say that teams typically miss more shots in the postseason. So having such a big lineup that can crash the glass could be a huge advantage when a lot of other teams are trying to go small, because not only is this team big, but they're able to defend those smaller lineups as well, which could be a really interesting part for this team. And it really is going to go one of two ways, in my opinion. It's either going to go really well and everybody's going to be looking around like, whoa, these guys have figured out, how to combat small ball lineups. All you have to do is have these really big, versatile players, and then you're good. And all you got to do is have a 6'9" point guard and you're fine. Or it's going to be, oh my gosh, we can't shoot. We're scoring 95 points a game and things are falling apart and we need to make a move. In my opinion, it's going to go one of two ways, and it's going to rely on how well Horford and Embiid play together. It's going to rely on Embiid's health. It's going to rely on Ben Simmons' ability to adjust, become more of an off-ball player at times, a more effective off-ball player in the times in which he is not running the offense. It's going to rely upon Josh Richardson to increase his efficiency from what he showed in Miami last year, be a good shooter, as well as Tobias Harris continue to progress as a scorer and on the defensive end ideally. And it's going to depend on guys like Zaire Smith stepping up off the bench, guys like Trey Burke stepping up off the bench. It's going to be a really interesting team in Philadelphia, and there's a reason that I saved them for last, because they're one of my favorite League Pass teams for this upcoming season, because you get so used to seeing everybody play the exact same way, and it's not like they're going to be doing anything revolutionary. They're still going to be spreading the floor, they're still going to be attacking in ball screens, but it's going to be at least a little bit different having such a big lineup out there, and I really want to see how other teams try and combat that, how they try to make adjustments, how long they stick to it if it doesn't go well. There's just so many interesting angles to this 76ers season, and I, for one, cannot wait, not just obviously for the NBA regular season to start in general, but specifically to see this 76ers team. They're not necessarily my pick to win the championship this upcoming season, but I have them as one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, one of the better teams in the entire league, and certainly way up there in terms of interest and intrigue. But that is going to be the end of today's video and of the NBA season preview series. We're done. I did all 30 teams. I told you guys I was going to do all 30. Some of you guys doubted, said I was going to do like 7 or 8 and then stop, but I got through all 30 of them. Really enjoyed doing the series. I look forward to getting back to more regular videos that are not just season previews all the time. I appreciate everybody that stuck with me through the series, that continued to watch every single video. I appreciate you guys so much, and be on the lookout for some different kinds of videos coming up instead of just all season previews. But once again, my name is Tucker. I thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you missed any of my previous ones, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.